Well, Sirom, all you embodiments of love. It's good to be here with you. Berniece to the lotus feet of our beloved Lord, that is the indweller of every heart here. Isn't it wonderful to know that we're all God? And we really have to play the part now. And so I'm hoping all of us are getting a wonderful chance to play this wonderful role. And you are. We all are. Well, I didn't get lost coming here today, but it was quite an adventure. The Lakers are playing basketball in LA, I understand. And so I was traveling along with all the Laker fans on about 6 different freeways. But anyway, Swami finally got me here, which I'm very grateful for. Thank you very much. Well, what I'd like to do today possibly is just to share with you a few things that have happened to me along the way and how Swami came into my life. And when you say yes to the Lord, just recently I was in Dallas, and they gave me a little placket that goes on my desk, and it says, "Yes, Lord." Well, when you say yes to the Lord, be ready to do anything that he asks you to do, and to take any test that he may give you. It's all part of the plan. It's all part of the game. It's all in bringing us near to him and near to us, which is him. So I said yes, and I keep saying yes. Yes, Lord. Well, at the age of 15, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior and was baptized and was very happy. And I was raised on a farm in Oklahoma, and I had a special place. We had our farm was on a creek, and I had a special place that I would go and talk to the Lord. And I felt so happy and so wonderful going to that place. And I could get away from, family life. I came from a family of 11 children, so you can imagine what our house was like. And working on a farm, living on a farm, it wasn't the easiest life, but it was the best. And at the time, I didn't know the difference anyway. So milking cows and picking cotton and doing all those wonderful things. I was raised a lot like Swami was raised, as a matter of fact. So I accepted Jesus as my Savior at the age of 15, and then I wanted everybody to know Jesus, because that's what Christians do. They want everybody to accept Jesus as their Savior. And I was no different. I wanted everybody to have that experience that I was experiencing. Then I met my brother's, I didn't meet him, I'd known him all my life, but my brother's best friend, and my brother passed away, and his best friend became my best friend, and then my husband. And Ron was not into organized religion. It just didn't suit him at all. I mean, he had gone to many revival meetings, and in Oklahoma you have lots of revival meetings where people speak in tongues, and the Holy Spirit is certainly there. But it didn't suit Ron. It wasn't his thing at all. So we married, we had a couple of children, and I continued my role as a Christian and going to church and teaching Sunday school. And I wanted my children also to be Christians. And I had just given up on Ron. I thought, he's a good man, and it doesn't matter if he doesn't accept Jesus as his Savior. It's okay. So then as time went on, and actually with the birth of our first son, I experienced depression, and I began searching. Could Jesus possibly be the only way? I don't know how that could possibly be, but not only that, but the church that I belonged to was the only true church. And I questioned that, and I began to go into metaphysics. And I'd heard about Edgar Cayce, and he talked about past lives, and Edgar Cayce's birthday was the same as my birthday. And also, he went to the same church that I did. And when he went into these trances, he began to get messages that what he was like in a past life, and all these wonderful truths came through, and it disturbed him at first. But when I read about those things, I knew that was true. And so I went to a meditation class and began to meditate, and Ron liked the difference in what he was seeing in me, and so he wanted to go to the meditation class. And so he did. And then 4 months after this, there was a meeting at a little metaphysical church in Stanton, California. And Hal Stokes and his wife were there, and they were talking about this reincarnation of Krishna. I didn't much want to go because, the only thing I knew about Krishna was these Hare Krishnas at the airport that wanted to give you books, and they looked so happy. And I thought that they just stayed that way all the time, not by natural means. So anyway, I wasn't too enthused about going, but Ron really wanted to go, and so I ended up going with him. And when Hal began talking, he began talking about his experience that he had just returned from this trip to India to see Sathya Sai Baba. That was the first time I had heard the name. He had a movie called The Divinity, Aura of Divinity, Richard Bach's movie. We were so captivated by the whole phenomena. Swami pulled us in just like that we smelled this sweet smell, and we looked around, Ron said, they must be burning incense, but there was no incense. It was just this sweet smell from God. And we were completely engulfed in this sweetness, this wonderful. And I knew that this was something I wanted to pursue. So I accepted a new Savior who was Jesus, but who was also Sathya Sai Baba. The next day, we had a family outing at Knott's Berry Farm. My mother took us all, and we had this wonderful fried chicken dinner that you have at Knott's Berry Farm. And I wanted to tell them, just like I did as a Christian, to tell my friends about Jesus. Now I wanted to tell my family about Sathya Sai Baba. You must know about this person that's in India now. He's doing all the things that Jesus did, and I'm talking, and they're eating their chicken and said, oh yeah, maybe. And they weren't interested, and I could not believe that they would not be interested in this great phenomena. So we began our pathway with Sathya Sai Baba. There were 3 books for sale that night, and we bought all of them. One of them was, of course, The Man of Miracles and Sam Sandweiss's book, The Psychiatrist with Baba. Beautiful books. We spent 5 months just engrossed in these books, and I wanted to go to India. I wanted desperately to go see Sai Baba. We didn't even know about a meeting. We found about the bookstore meeting about 5 months later, and we went to that meeting. I believe it was August, the first Sunday in August. And there were several people talking about their trip that they had just returned from seeing Sathya Sai Baba. Oh gosh, I was so excited, and I wanted to go. Now we heard about Swami on February the 23rd, 1977. And we went to our first meeting in that first August of 1977. And I wanted to go see Swami. So I made a deal that I would try to be there within at least 5 years. 5 years' time, I should be able to have that goal to go see Sai Baba. But as it turned out, I got to make my first trip in 1978, the summer of 1978. There were 14 of us on this trip, and this was all of us, our first-timers. We were all first-timers. And when we got there, there were a lot of people. How many of you went to see Sai Baba for the first time in 1978? Oh, a few of you, yeah. Well, I know that seems like that he called a lot of people in 1978. So I made my first trip. Ron said he wasn't quite ready to go, but my good friend Mary Keene, I had been talking to her about, we were teaching school together, and I was telling her about this wonderful phenomena, and she wanted to go too. So we found this family, Bob Reinhardt and Jenny. Some of you may remember them. And their whole family went, and there was a whole slew of us. And so my miracles began. Getting our passports was just a breeze, and getting our tickets. And Mary's ticket, she'd got her income tax return, and her ticket was the same price as her income tax return. And I thought, this is cool, man. This guy he's something else. And so we were getting on the airplane in LA, and I said goodbye to Ron and the 2 kids, and turn around and go down the hallway, and I smelled this smell that I had smelled in the church. And I said, oh gosh, he's greeting us even here. And I turned to Mary, and I said, do you smell that smell? She said, yes, isn't that wonderful? And we'd smelled that smell when we went to get our passports. So along the way, we were smelling that wonderful smell. And then we had a layover in London, and the smell was, when we got on the plane that night, we were all in different areas of the plane because we had spent the day playing in London instead of sleeping. And when we got on the plane, we were all separated in different places. And I got that smell again. And I looked for Mary, see if she had the smell. But there was a young man with us that was sitting there in the window, and he was with us for the first time and said, "Hey, do you smell that smell?" "No, I don't smell anything." And then this little Australian guy gets on, and I'm in the middle seat, and he sits down, and he says, "Say, do you smell that sweet smell?" He said, "I believe they have sprayed the plane with something." Well, here's a guy that wasn't even a Baba devotee, and he smelled the smell. This kid's going to India with, he didn't smell it. But later, Mary, of course, smelled it, but we smelled the smell all this trip. And I remember Swami coming out for darshan the first time, and he just slowly came out. He was living, of course, in the Mandir at that time. And I looked at him, and then I wondered, is he really who he says he is? I mean, I'm not sure. And he was so graceful and so beautiful, and yet my mind was saying, is he for real? Can this possibly be? And the experiences began. We were all cramped together, all 14 of us in a little 2-room with an Indian toilet, and you can imagine what it was like. And one day Mary would be up and I would be down. The next day I would be up and Mary would be down, and we would just sort of sustain each other. But it was quite a trip, and it lasted for a couple of weeks. And every day there was a new experience for me. And one particular day I was sitting out, I think it's to the west. I get all mixed up when I'm there. But, in those days, darshan, you didn't have the discipline that you had in the later days. And you could go in anytime you wanted and leave and that type of thing. And I was sitting over there alone. And Swami comes out on the veranda. It was after darshan and before bhajans. And he stands there and just looks at me. Kept looking at me. And kept looking at me. And I thought, oh my gosh, I wonder what he's seeing. Does he see that I'm not a good person? Or does it mean that I'm a good person or that I'm a bad person? And I'm thinking all these thoughts, and I don't know what to do about it. And I can't keep my eyes off of him because he's looking at me. And finally, he does this and turns around and goes back in. Well, when he did that, I broke down and started weeping. And I couldn't stop. I'd stop for a while and think, this is ridiculous. Why am I crying? And then I'd start up again. I'd remember him doing this, and then I'd start up again. So I ran out of the darshan. I just couldn't stay there because I couldn't stop crying. And I went up the hill. You could go up there on the hills. And I sat on a rock, and I wept for about 45 minutes. Just wept and wept and wept, and I could not stop weeping. I kept thinking, why am I doing this? What is happening? And I'd see Swami doing this again, and I'd weep again. Finally, some goat herder came up and said, "Ma, ma," and got me out of my stupor, and I knew then that I had to stop crying and get back to the room. Well, I was like a wet noodle. I mean, it was just... But it was a spiritual experience. I can't say that I know exactly what was happening and what was happening to me and to this day, but I know that Swami was doing something to me and basically calling me in. I mean, I have no clue. But Sam Sandwai said he had the similar experience, which I thought was interesting. So later on our trip, he called all the Westerners into the Mandir for a discourse. So we all went in. There were probably less than 200 of us, but it was, people from England and from the Italians said, no, he only wants the Italians. And he said, no, he wants all the Westerners in. So we had to argue with the Italians for a while because they were sure it was just for them. But Swami called it. And then people were looking in the window, so Swami had them all close the windows and the doors, and there we were with Swami. He got up and gave a discourse, and Kasturi translated Swami's discourse into English, and then they had an Italian who translated the discourse from English to Italian. So we had Swami, Kasturi, and the Italian, and by the time Swami said something, and these two interpreters, I didn't know what Swami said. And I kept trying to pay attention. Now, wait a minute, what is he saying here? And Kasturi had this accent that I had a tough time listening to anyway. Then the Italian would take over, and I'd lose it completely. Well, when it was over, I I said, what did he say? What really happened here? I'm not sure. And I was so confused because I wanted to know what Swami said. And then Swami came around to every one of us and handed us vibhuti. And I said to Swami, thank you. And he said, mm-hmm. Then after that discourse, I went home, and I wasn't going to write Swami a letter. He knows everything about me. Why do I need to write a letter to Swami? And I had made up my mind, I don't need to write a letter. But I went home and wrote a letter. The first line was, what am I doing here? And I wrote, and I wanted to know more about what he was trying to tell us that day. I was trying to think, what is going on here? So that afternoon, I went early to Darshan so I could be assured a first row seat. And I did get a first row seat. And Swami came to me. Thank you so very much. Swami came up to me and reached out for my letter. And I gave it to him, and he said, thank you. So my first words to him were thank you for the vibhuti, and his first words to me were thank you for the letter. And so my journey began. When I left by myself because the rest of them were staying on for the rest of the summer, but I had to get home. I had a family at home, and I had promised Ron he'd let me go. I'd come back and we'd go see the folks in Oklahoma, and we'd spend the rest of our summer with the family. So I came home alone, but I just felt this deep, I didn't want to leave. I did not want to leave, and I knew that Swami had done something for me. But before I had gone, I'd had a few dreams, and he had materialized a ring for me in a dream. And I was so sure that I was going to get that ring. He was going to call me in, of course, right, and make this ring for me. So I left the ashram before Guru Purnima because I had decided I didn't want to be there with all those crowds, and I was going to I had an open ticket, and I was going to go to Bangalore and get home as soon as I could. But when I got to Bangalore, I couldn't get out for 3 days. And it was Guru Purnima, and I had a friend there from Texas that was with me. And so we decided to go to Merchant Street and do a little shopping Guru Purnima night. So we got us a little, those little carts that took us down, and we went shopping. And on the way back, I could tell he was lost. He didn't know where our hotel was. We just kept kind of going in circles. And I said, you know what? He doesn't know where we are. I mean, he doesn't know what to... Well, that day we had gone to lunch. I wanted some good food. The hot food at Prashanthi Nilayam was just a little bit too much for me. So I wanted some good food, and she said, well, there's a Peacock restaurant here. Said, they really have good food. So we had this little guy take us to the Peacock restaurant, and then he got lost. That guy got lost going back to our hotel. So he stopped and asked a little kid, a guy on a motorcycle, and he took his helmet off and he looked. He said, yes, I know where the Peacock restaurant is. Says it's, and he told him where it was, and then he told him how to get back to our place. So that night, coming back from Merchant Street, this guy gets lost, and I said, you know what? He has no clue where. And so he stops again, and this same kid on this motorcycle that had stopped that day, he said, he asked him in his language, where our hotel was, and he looked back at us and he said, yes, I know where the Peacock restaurant is. He was showing us that he remembered that he had showed us how to get home from the Peacock restaurant that day. So he said, your hotel's right around the corner. Just get out and I'll walk you there. So I was willing to do that, and my friend said, no. I said, no, he's okay. And what are you doing here? And so we got out and walked with him, and the moon was this big full moon, of course, it's Guru Purnima. And he said, what are you doing in India? And we said, well, we've been here to visit our guru, our Sathya Sai Baba. He says, what? Then why aren't you with him tonight? If he's your guru, this is Guru Purnima, and you should be with him. And he began to really lash out. I said, oh my gosh. And then when we got back to the hotel room, I said, wait a minute. What are the chances of this same motorcycle kid knowing where our hotel was, and then we'd see him that night, the same one? I mean, he'd see it in a different part of town. I said, do you think maybe that it was the guru himself? So we had a really nice experience with that. But Swami came to Whitefield then, and then I had one more darshan on Sunday morning, and I was so happy to have that darshan. And Swami came to me, and I had several things that to be blessed, and he took them and he blessed them, and I thought he would call me in. He hadn't made them a ring yet for me. Surely he's going to call me in. I mean, I had already left Buddha parties, left him for Guru Purnima, but here he came to Whitefield, and I thought, well, he's following me. He's going to give me that ring. So he told me he would bless me on my trip home, and I knew I wasn't going to get an interview. So when I went to the hotel room, and some of you have heard this story, the ring that he had materialized for me in my dream was in the hotel room. But it was dirty. It was beautiful, but it was old. And while I was at Prashanthi Nilayam, I had met Camille Swenson. And she had told me the story of John. She said that Swami had brought a ring from Shirdi Baba's tomb, and she said he was dirty. Said he was really dirty. So when I saw my ring, I looked at it. If I put it on my finger and it fit, and I said, oh my gosh, I think I probably have a ring from a tomb somewhere. But I got my Colgate toothpaste out, and I cleaned it up real good, and it was shining brightly. And then everybody got excited. Mary, I had told her about the dream. She said, oh, Berniece, that's the ring that was in your dream. I said, yeah, I know. But the manager of the hotel said, no, somebody left it there. I said, it's probably the gal who was with you. I said, well, I'm going to see her in Bombay tonight. I'll ask if it's her. I knew it wasn't her ring. I knew the ring had not even been there while I was there. It had just gotten there while I went to Darshan. So that was a whole story, the ring story, and it ended up a little bit later. And the next year, 1979, I wanted to go again. My heart was being drawn again. I felt like I needed to go see Swami again. He had really pulled me in really good. So I was making plans to go with all my school teacher buddies. It was summertime, and I tried to make a reservation, and I couldn't get there come hell or high water. It just wasn't happening. So one day I told Ron, I said, you know what? I can't go. Swami's not allowing me to go. There's somebody who says, oh, you don't. No, I said, and I told all the ways I had been trying to go, and I could not go. So everybody left, and I waved goodbye. We went to Oklahoma to see the folks and had a little trip, a vacation. Came back, it's getting close to time for school to start, and I had a dream. And Swami said, come now. Oh, wait a minute. And he said it 3 times in the dream. So I thought, well, I've got to go. So when I woke Ron up and I said, Ron, I've got to go to India. He said, oh, what? So I said, well, I just had a dream from Swami, and he told me 3 times, come now. He said, well, I'm not so sure that's what he meant. I said, well, what did he mean then? So anyway, that was the days when you didn't have to have a visa if you stayed less than 30 days. So I said, well, I'm just going to check and see if I can get a ticket. Well, I got a ticket, fine. And 3 days later, I was on the plane going to India, and all my buddies were on the plane coming home. So when I got there, I knew that Swami had called me. I knew that I was there for a reason. But the first darshan, you're there, you've been on the airplane for days, seems like, and I was sitting in the sand. That was during sand darshan, and sun and sand, and it's afternoon darshan, and I'm thinking, Berniece, you just did the most stupid thing. School is starting in 3 weeks, and you've come to India because of a dream. That's really stupid. And my mind has just given me a really sad time. I'm in the second row, and people had given me several letters to give to Swami. And Swami comes out, and I'm about 2/3 of the way down on the women's side, and Swami comes out, and he looks at my way, and I'm saying, Swami's looking at me. I'm not in the first row, I'm in the second row. And then he comes off the veranda and goes right to me. And I'm so happy to see him. I mean, it's just my good old Oklahoma, and he looks at me, and he reaches out for my letters, and I give them to him, and I say, hi. And Swami said, very happy, very happy. So I guess he liked the hi. I was pretty green and simple and stupid in those days, and hi seemed perfectly all right to say to God to me. But I realized that during this trip, this was a testing trip. I had to be there alone because he was going to test me. So I was sitting underneath his bedroom window there because he stayed there, in this prayer hall up at the top. I go over, get up early, 4 o'clock, and go over, and I'm so happy. Oh, thank you, Lord, for letting me come. I was in bliss. I mean, I was just that happy. And I go and sit down, and I close my eyes, and I began to, meditate. He's right here, up here in this bedroom, and I'm right down below, just below him. And I'm communicating. And then all of a sudden, I have a thought, hey, what if he isn't who he says he is? Or what if he's the Antichrist? Oh, but wait a minute, where in the world is that coming from? But that thought would not leave me. And finally, I just got up and I ran back to my room and I'm praying to that God that I used to pray to way out there. Please, if I'm not supposed to be here, get me out of here as quickly as you can. So I go to the room and I lay down and I start praying to Jesus. Now, I never talked too much to Jesus because I always went to the head guy, God. I figured that... and then I'd say in Jesus' name, and I figured if God was busy with the universe, Jesus could take my prayer to him. So I always really prayed to God. But that morning I decided to bring Jesus in on the act. I said, I love this Swami, and I see you in him. I've seen it, but I don't know. If I don't belong here, please, you've got to help get me out. And I can't tell you what a hell that was. What I was going through in my mind. But you see, coming my background as a fundamental Christian, I'm telling you folks this story because I want to tell you how the transformation of Berniece, of what happened with me, and what he had to do to bring this out of me. You see, I had these doubts inside me, and I didn't know that they were there. I had no clue that these doubts were there, and they were there. And I kept thinking, it's time for darshan. Should I go to darshan? Yeah, I need to go to darshan. But when I sat down, I knew that he was so powerful that when he came out, I could not look at him. So I closed my eyes, and then I began to hear people laugh. My dream is happening. Because in my dream, people on the right, they had told me that Swami was not giving any more interviews. So I thought, well, there's no need of even opening my eyes. I'll just close my eyes. And when I opened, and people began to laugh, and I opened my eyes, and Swami was in front of me, and he invited me for an interview. This was my dream. People over here began to laugh. I thought, oh my goodness. Now I've had my eyes closed. Remember, I can't look at him because he's too powerful. I know he's powerful. Whoever he is, he's got a lot of power. I thought, my heart began to beat fast, and I thought, as soon as I open up my eyes, he's going to be right in front of me, just like my dream. So I opened my eyes. There he was. He said, when are you leaving? And I thought, well, real soon, I think. So I said, well, I'm leaving on Wednesday. He said, go to the interview. So I went, and my eyes were all red and swollen from crying. And he looks at me so sweetly, and so he was just like my earthly father who had a grocery store for some time when I was growing up, and he would bring my sister and I, when we were sad about something, he'd bring us candy. And so now my heavenly father was acting the part of my earthly father, and he said, would you like some candy? I've been crying all morning. And of course I smiled and said, yes. So he puts out his hand like that, and he does that, and he makes me this wonderful, wonderful. There were about 7 in the interview, and there was enough for everybody. But it was so wonderful. And then he begins to talk to me and tell me about my mind, what I had been going through that morning. Then he goes into my husband and my son, Jay and Ron. Now, throughout the years, some of my biggest tests have been through my husband and my son. And it's ongoing. Ron right now is very ill. I won't talk so much about that, but the tests that I've had have involved, and so Swami right away brings that out to me and talks about my husband and my son. Did you know husband before marriage? Did you know son before birth? Why are you so attached? I didn't know what was going to be down the road, you see. This was my first interview. Then he says, you know, I hear all the prayers. I even hear the prayers to Jesus. I'd prayed to Jesus that morning, remember? So he was so sweet and then I realized that trip was about me becoming a Christian, a real Christian, about me being transformed. I didn't know I had these doubts and these fears inside me. He didn't let me come with all my friends who could have supported me. He made me come alone. And nearly everyone I met on that trip, they had doubts about Swami. And I'd say, and I'd talk to them about it. I just kept talking to them. But that trip really sustained my faith. And Swami knew what he was doing, of course. And then I realized also on that trip that I was going to get songs. I was raised in a gospel singing family, and we sang a lot of gospel songs. And Swami then began to work with me through these gospel songs. And on this second trip, he gave me this song about on higher ground. Martin, are you around? Oh, anyway, we're going to do higher ground here in just a little bit, if you can get it together. Anyway, the song I had sung throughout the years with my family and all was coming to me on this trip. It just kept coming and coming and coming. I couldn't get it off my mind. And then I came home and I talked to my mother, and my mother was still alive at that time, and I said, the strangest thing happened. This higher ground, this song just kept coming and coming and coming. She said, my Lord, the same song came to me the whole time you were gone. So you see, Swami was working with me and with my mother at home. And he had blessed a handkerchief for her on that trip. I had it in my hand one day. I told her, send your ring or something. No, she wanted to send this handkerchief. Swami picked that handkerchief up and rubbed it in his hands like this and put it back in my hand and slapped it, and he said, I bless. Well, boy, she took that handkerchief and she kissed it, and she was so happy when I got home. And then when she passed away, I wondered what happened to that handkerchief. Well, Mother was one of these little old ladies that always put an apron on every morning before when she got up. And in that apron pocket was that handkerchief, which she always carried with her. But the lesson I was learning on that second trip that he was bringing this out was he was raising my level of awareness. Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Do you know it? Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. Well, that's an old Christian song, and it was a song that meant a lot at that time. When Swami gave that song to me, yes, that's what's happening. He's raising my level of awareness. We're going to a higher plane. And so I was asking him basically through that song, Lord, lift me up and let me stand by faith on heaven's tableland, a higher plane than I have found. Lord, plant my feet on higher ground. And so that second trip was it was an important trip, a very important trip. And usually, each time I would go, Swami would always come to me, usually the first darshan or so, but then I reached a new level. In 1992, it was Shivaratri time, and Swami wouldn't look at me. Wait a minute. Swami, you know me. We've talked together. We've had some I've had some nice times with you. And he would look at me. He'd look at the person behind me, the person on each side of me, and then walk on. And then I was with my sister and a couple other ladies, and we'd always walk into darshan together. But one day, the Sevadals pulled me aside and said, you go over here. And I said, no, I'm with these ladies. And, no, it doesn't matter. If Swami calls you in, you go in. If he calls them in, you go in. I said, it doesn't matter. So I followed the Sevadals' advice and went over here and sat in this line. This was Shivaratri. So my dear friends were the first ones to go in. I was in row 15. didn't even get in. So I began to think, there's something wrong with this picture. I'm not sure what's going on here, but Swami, you've always given me a little bit of attention, and now you're not giving me any attention. So we were getting ready to go home, and Swami hadn't looked at me. And frankly, I was a little sad and a little mad, because I felt, you really want that darshan, you want that look, and it wasn't happening. And then they ran to us and said, oh, Swami's in the car. Said, he's coming around. When we were down from Elsie's place, said, Swami will be here just shortly. I had my skirt on, my traveling clothes. So I ran around, and then Swami looked at me. He looked at me like, so surprised. Well, you're here? And so he did this, and then this. Goodbye. And on the trip, in the taxi on the way to Bangalore, it was that old Volkswagen bus, and it was rough as Dickens, and they were harvesting sugar cane. And I said, oh gosh, I'd like to have some of that sugar cane, because sometimes during cotton season, we had sugar cane and we'd get that sugar cane and chew on it. I said, I haven't had sugar cane since I was a kid. And so one of the people that was with us was a doctor, and he spoke Telugu. He said, we'll stop. We'll stop. The farmers were right there, and he told them we'd like some sugar cane. So he gave us, and I tried to give him a couple of rupees, so he wouldn't take any rupees. He said, no. So the fellow that was with us, he took that sugar cane and he beat it and he beat it and he beat it, and to get each one of us a piece off, then he beat it and beat it and beat it again and get it. So when I got home, the first thing I read was, Swami said, I have to treat you like the sugar cane. I have to beat you and beat you to get the sweetness out. And so I knew that trip was about a beating, being beaten to get the sugar out. Well, later that year, 92, I had another trip, and it was a Swami's birthday, and it was his overseas office bearers time. And he called all of us in again. There weren't many of us. Srinivas, you were there. And gave us a beautiful discourse. And actually, he spoke to us so much in English. It was the first discourse where I had and it was so funny, the interpreter would repeat the English words too, to make sure we got them. And the electricity went off while we were in there. And of course, the mics went off, and Swami just did this, and they came back on. And everybody clapped. They were so happy. So I was lucky to be on the front row, and his talk was so sweet, and he looked at me and he says, follow me. Why don't you follow me? And I thought, oh my goodness, Swami, I am following you. Of course I'm following you. And he looked at me again and he says, follow me. So on the way home, I'm getting on the airplane. I think, wait a minute. I've had a theme song for every trip I've had, and I don't even have a theme song for this trip. So I look in the book on the plane, and I'm trying to manipulate a theme song. Couldn't find one. So when we got to Singapore, on the flight from Singapore to Tokyo, we saw a movie, and it was Sister Act. And I knew that I had my song. I will follow you wherever you may go. For near you I always will be. Nothing can keep you away. You are my destiny. If you know it, sing it with me. I will follow you wherever you may go. For near you I always will be. Nothing can keep you away or me away. You are my destiny. Yes, you are my destiny. And I've loved that song ever since, and I've loved that Sister Act too, because it's really true that He is our destiny. And so I had the ups and the downs and the ups and the downs and the teacher trainings, and Swami was working with me full time. And then I became the National Education Coordinator. It wasn't something that I really desired. Ron and I had just retired from our public education jobs, and And we were going to have a new life. The children now were married, and they were setting up their own households, and we were free. The dog had died, and the kids were gone, and so we were free. And so I really didn't want particularly a new job. I was a regional education coordinator, and that was really enough. But Dr. Goldstein called. He said he'd like for me to be the national education coordinator. So I felt like, well, that's Swami. So we sold our house and got rid of everything, detached from things. Lots of things, because we had a 5-bedroom house and had lots of things in it. And that detaching was rather difficult. And then I needed to do the teacher's manual, and so we did the teacher's manual, and I knew that I had to go to see Swami before I started this job as a national education coordinator and training teachers. Well, 6 weeks after we sold our house, and we're doing all these good, wonderful, happy things, I was at Ojai with Pat Wing, and I got a telephone call. And it was from Jay's wife, saying Jay had an accident, and that it didn't look good. It looked like that he was in surgery, but they weren't sure that he was going to make it. And I'm thinking, now wait a minute, Swami. Wait a minute. What is wrong with this picture? I had just read part of a discourse on our way back to California, which Swami said, I want to tell you a story about ego. This ego is, say there's this man who lost his son. And he's weeping and he's wailing, and his neighbor comes and says, hey, why are you weeping and wailing? Don't you know what the scriptures say? They say, if your son dies, that's the end of his karma, and that's it. Why are you weeping? And so he said, well, yeah, he'd forgotten about those scriptures. Well, the next week, his friend's son passed away, and he's weeping and wailing. So his other friend had to come and tell him, look, you just told me last week that when your son, if your children die young, it's because their karma is finished. Did you forget that already? And I thought at the time when I read it, what if I lost my son? And I couldn't get it out of my mind. I thought, wait a minute, this is not a good thought to be having right now. And then 3 days later, when Jay's accident happened, I had a talk with Swami on the way back to the campground from Pat's house. Swami, are you really taking away my son? I mean, I don't understand. Just help me to have some understanding. Help me to have some peace. So most of you know the story of how it went on and how Swami directed the play. And I was able to go see Swami after the accident, or Jay says the incident. And in it, he scolded me. He called me in, but he scolded me for having so much attachment to this son. He said, you have a role to play. Play the role. This is a role I have given you. And he was so sweet. He put his finger in the middle of my forehead, and he said, I'm blessing you, I'm directing you, I'm guiding you. Have confidence. And I thought, whoa, I said, well, I have this son that's in this, he has a head injury, and we're not sure what. He said, why are you so attached to this son? How many sons have you had? Do you remember any of them? See, Swami can be really tough with us when he needs to be. I'm going through a very difficult situation, Swami. Don't you understand what I'm going through? And Swami said, hey, you have a role to play. Go play that role. He said, this is a big drama. You are all actors in this drama. You all have your roles to play. This is your role to play. Okay. So I give in again, give up. But this is the way Swami has dealt with me throughout. If you say yes, Lord, then mean yes. And so that's what I have tried to do. I've tried to say yes, Lord, and then through a few years later, we began to hear from Jay through a medium of sorts, and he wrote to us on another level. And I wasn't sure about these letters and I shared them at a first Sunday once, and I got such a good response from them. They said, those letters are just truth. So I decided, well, maybe I should share them more. Maybe I should write a book and put these letters in the book. But I still wasn't sure about that because a medium, a person in a coma, can he do his mind. And then Swami said in one of his discourses, some people have minds. He said, all of your thoughts are out here. Everything, every word and everything you said. And some people can pick those up. And of course, Debbie was able to do that with Jay. So when I went to 2008 to the education conference and was supposed to be one of the speakers at the education conference, but that morning, and Phyllis Crystal was to be one of the speakers, and that morning, Swami decides to call us in for an interview. We didn't need to talk. We didn't need to speak. Frankly, I felt really relieved. I had my rose in my hand to give to Swami, and he calls us in. And it was just like, as Phyllis calls it, a tea party with the Lord. This little English lady, of course. But it was a wonderful time. It was my last time to be with Swami, and it had been 11 years since I had talked with Swami. I had sat on the dais with him. I had had interaction in darshan and that, but it had been 11 years since I had had an interview. So I was so grateful, and I'm sitting there, I'm just so grateful. I'm thinking, this may be my last interview, and I need to really take advantage of it. And then I said to him, Swami, we've been receiving letters through a medium from Jay, and I'd like to know if I should share these letters. And he said, yes, share. And before I left the interview, he told me 2 more times to share the letters. And so I went ahead and finished the book and shared the letters. And if any of you would like to look up, the latest letters we've gotten are on his website, Letters from Jay, which is just initialj.com. But I believe they have some books here too today if anybody was interested in reading the Letters from Jay. But Swami guided me along that way too. And has it been easy? Is it easy? No, not really. Not really, but once we get into that space, and then Swami has a nerve to leave his body. And I'm thinking, I had just returned from a funeral in my family. 2011 wasn't a good year for my family. I lost a sister-in-law, a brother-in-law, and a niece and a nephew. And I had just returned from the sister-in-law's funeral in Kansas on Saturday night, and I got a call from India. The Swami just left his body. Nah, that must be a rumor. No, Swami, we just said Anil Kumar just made the announcement to everybody. He left his body. Well, I couldn't believe it. It's Easter Sunday in India. It's Saturday night at home. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, no. What a great day to play this role. I mean, he's leaving on Easter Sunday. He's coming back. And people call me. That night, I guess I got 3 or 4 calls. One call from Kansas City. It was after midnight there. And he said, Berniece, I just heard the story. I said, no, don't worry. Don't worry about that. He's coming back. He's coming back. I just felt so sure that Swami was coming back. And each day, they bring his body in, and then they had his funeral. And when they had his funeral and his services and all the big guys were there, I thought, Swami, are you going to raise up, the world will see you and they'll know who you are. I mean, goodness, it took Jesus a long time to be known, but you've been in, and I'm talking with Swami, I know what he's going to do. He's going to raise up, right, from the dead. Well, after this was over, the next day, I began to think, maybe he's not going to come back. And then the grief hit me. And I'm driving home. I listen to the radio, go to Jay's and back and forth, and the radio's on, and I start crying, just weeping. I hadn't cried at all because I knew Swami was coming back. And then all of a sudden, the reality hit. No, I don't think he is. And I was weeping, and a song came on. Again, he was teaching me. Stop your crying. It'll be okay. You'll always be in my heart. It was Phil Collins' song from Tarzan. How perfect. Stop your crying. It'll be all right. You'll always be in my heart. And Swami is in our hearts. We need to realize that. I don't know why Swami left when he did. I mean, he really fooled us all, didn't he? But now is the time for us all to really know that Swami's with us. He's given us the reins now. He's telling us, you go and you do what you need to do. You be good, you do good, you see good. You're God, you're all God. Practice the values. And manifest that divinity that's inside you. We're all getting this wonderful chance. And you know what I'm seeing so much of? There's so much turmoil going on. I don't know what's going on with the devotees even. There's a lot of turmoil going on. Well, I'm not sure if it's the turmoil that we need to go through so we can get back to who we really are. But folks, it really is necessary for all of us to love one another, to practice these values. Swami was the supreme teacher. He taught us all, whether you ever had an interview or you didn't, or you had dozens and dozens or whatever, you still had a closeness with this Swami. Swami is in you. And one of the last things Swami said to me, he looked at me and he said, I'm always with you. Remember that. I'm always with you. I'm up above you. I'm behind you. I'm inside you. Now, he tells us that in discourses all the time. But when he looked at me in the eyes and told me that, I really believed him. And you believe that. He is. But we really have to do better, folks. We've got to be these lights, these wonderful lights that are glowing in the darkness. There's a lot of darkness on earth right now. Did you notice? But there always has been. And I remember one time I was complaining to Swami about the darkness, about so many dysfunctional families in my classroom, so many one-parent families, and Swami's sitting there and he's listening to my sad story of all these dysfunctional families as if he didn't know that there were dysfunctional families. And then he says to me, but that's not all bad. It takes the darkness for the light to be seen. And so we're gambling in the darkness. But you're all these wonderful lights. How did you find out about Swami? How in the world did I find out about Swami? What is this really all about? I just took Jay to the neurologist the other day, and I was telling him about the letters, and I asked him, did you ever hear Sathya Sai Baba? And he said, no, I don't believe I have. Here is a real famous doctor in Orange County, and he'd never even heard the name. Well, think of the people who'd never heard the name. And how did you? Were you born into a family? If you were, you have really good karma. But all of us, you see, everyone here has this wonderful good karma. And what are we going to do about it? Are we really going to do the best we can? Are we really going to, when we see someone we don't like, when they say something we don't like, are we going to say, yeah? Or are we going to say, hey, what's inside me that's making me see that? That's what we need to do. We need to begin to see God in everyone. It's going to happen. It will happen. I don't think I'll have time to finish the ring story, but I'll write another book and finish that ring story. But I'd like to talk a little bit, just finish up with His grace, His wonderful grace. On this trip, on my trip, one of the trips in '99, again, Swami didn't call us in. I felt like he was going to call us in, but he didn't. And I woke up on Friday morning, it's the day we were leaving, and I heard this voice, and it said, Friday, your karma is finished. Oh, hey, I'm not asleep. That's not a dream. I heard a voice. So I got up and I write it down, and I went to the bathroom, and this song came to me. The song that used to be is, God's love is so wonderful. But the song changed, the words changed. God's grace is so wonderful, so wonderful, so wonderful. God's grace is so wonderful, God's wonderful grace. You sing it with me. God's grace is so wonderful, so wonderful, so wonderful. God's grace is so wonderful, God's wonderful grace. Now sing it like you mean it. God's grace is so wonderful, so wonderful, so wonderful. God's grace is so wonderful, God's wonderful grace. God's wonderful grace. And I think of a story that Swami gave to us at one of the teacher trainings. We were discussing testing the children. How important it was before they came from group 1 to group 2, from group 2 to group 3. They needed to have a test. They needed to know if they knew all these different prayers and all. And we sat there and just beat that subject into the ground. We were meeting out in one of those sheds out there where the north buildings are now. Then they decided that they needed to have a certain percentage before they could go on. Can you imagine someone in group 1, 16, couldn't pass the test because he didn't know this certain prayer? But anyway, those teachers didn't think like I was thinking, a public school teacher. So, percentage. What percentage should they have? Well, they should have at least 70%. Well, in those days, Swami would come and give us darshan. We couldn't go to darshan, but Swami would come to us. So we heard this Mercedes, Swami's coming. So when Swami comes in, this talk stops. And he gives us all darshan, and then he goes to the mic and he says, let's say that before you merge with God, you have to have a test. And he said, let's say that you have to have a certain percentage. And he said, 70%. But he said, what if you don't have 70%? And I thought, me, 69.5. Not quite there, but almost there. What if you have 60 or 65? Swami said, don't worry. The grace of God will bring you home. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a soul like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. You know the next verse? 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. 'Twas grace that brought us safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. When we've been here 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun. God bless you all. It was so sweet being here with all of you and sharing these stories with you.